Um, Today we're going to be talking about the monster of Rillington Place, aka John Christie. He is an infamous serial killer who was located in London and committed his murders from the late 1940s into the early 1950s. Now, a little background on John Christie here. Before he became known as the monster of Rillington Place, he earned himself quite the rap sheet of petty crime from 1920s into the 1930s, which included stealing postal orders, obtaining money under false pretenses, violent conduct, larceny, assault, and car theft. Now, apparently the car theft was the nail in the coffin there, because after he served his time in prison for that car theft in 1933, he decided, hey, honey, let's move. So he gathered his wife and moved into 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill, London, which is the location that would later become synonymous with his murders. At the beginning of the Second World War, Christie applied to become a War Reserve Constable, which is pretty much a police officer for all of us Americans out there, which in that role involved blackout enforcement, assisting with evacuations, and capturing deserters, which, remember, this is during World War II. He was accepted, and it was during this time that he met Ruth First, a 21-year-old munitions officer who reportedly supplemented her income with prostitution, which was not uncommon at the time at all. There were a lot of females, their men were off at war or whatever, and they were trying to make a living for themselves. So they would go off and do that, which was also legal at the time. Christie claimed he met Ruth in a snack bar where she was soliciting clients. He took her back to his home while his wife was away visiting family and ended up strangling her with a rope, hiding her body under the floorboards before burying her in the garden the very next day. Now, I thought when I first learned this, it was very weird that he would hide her under the floorboards at first and then hide her in the yard. But come to find out, 10 Rillington Place isn't a single family home, right? This is multiple families live here and they share the garden that's out back. So I would assume that he was like, I got to do something with the body for now. And then whenever he found out the coast was clear, he went back to this garden and buried her body, which is still nuts to do that and use a public area to hide the body so close to you. Just wild, absolutely nuts. Soon after this murder, Christie resigned from his role as a police constable and then went on to find work at a radio factory where he met his second victim, Muriel Eady. Muriel suffered from bronchitis, which Christie exploited to lure her to his flat with promises of a special remedy. Christie gave her a jar with a tube attached, telling her to inhale the mixture, which was just Friar's Balsam. And Friar's Balsam was like a topical antiseptic at the time and could also be heated and used as like an inhalant to help with sore throat. Once she was comfortable, he connected a second tube from the jar to a gas line, allowing coal gas with a 15% carbon monoxide content to seep in. When she lost consciousness, Christie strangled and raped her, then buried her next to Ruth in the garden. If you're like me, when I was researching this, I first thought, how in the world has this dude gotten away with not one, but two murders at this point in a public housing unit with a public garden where he's hiding these bodies? And as I researched, I learned that it was probably a lot of people just not really paying attention. He might have just been sneaky enough, and a lot of police negligence, which actually comes into these next couple murders. In late 1949, Timothy Evans, another resident of 10 Rillington Place, went to the police claiming his wife was dead. Officers discovered the body of his wife, Beryl, their 13-month-old daughter, Geraldine, and a 16-week-old fetus in an outdoor wash house. Both Beryl and Geraldine had been strangled. Now, this wash house was in that very same garden where he had already hidden the other two bodies. Timothy initially told police Christie performed a botched abortion on his wife, but under pressure, he confessed to killing them himself. Later, he recanted, insisting Christie was responsible. Now, that's just a weird statement right there. And in my research, it was just as confusing, right? So Timothy calls the police, says, hey, my wife's dead, right? Police take him, and they put him under questioning, going, hey, where are the bodies, man? He tells the police that the bodies were in like a drainage ditch. They went and checked the drainage ditch. There was no bodies to be found. They went back to the property. They looked around until they eventually stumbled across the bodies in that wash house out in the garden. They come back to Timothy. They feed him all of the information of what they found. Timothy then says, oh yeah, Christie performed this botched abortion, which why would they allow Christie to do that? Well, Christie would tell people that he was an abortionist, and I'm assuming, given the times, they probably weren't ready for a second kid, and that was probably what they came up with. Now, what confuses me is why Timothy wouldn't be like, dude, it was Christie, right? Like, he allowed himself to get pressured into this after learning all of the information of where the bodies were stored. He was able to kind of come up with a story himself to give the police the answers that they were looking for. So obviously they were like super interrogating him and being like, we know you did it. And he just eventually gave the confession. But where I'm curious is how he's like, no, Christie did it. Like, I wonder if Christie kind of threatened him and was like, I'll get you next. And he was trying to save his own skin. I don't know. During Timothy Evans' trial, Christie testified as a key witness. Evans reiterated that Christie committed the murders, but Christie emphasized the couple's frequent arguments and painted Evans as unstable. The jury found Evans guilty, and he was sentenced to death by hanging on January 31st, 1950. He then submitted an appeal. However, his appeal was denied, and he was then executed on March 9th, 1950. It was later revealed that the police handled this case disastrously. They coerced Evans into a confession, they failed to properly examine the crime scene, and ignored red flags, including the fact that Christie used a femur from one of his victims to prop open the garden gate just steps away from the wash house. And it was later revealed, after Christie had been caught later on, that one of his dogs had even dug up the skull of Muriel Eady shortly after police searched for the bodies of Beryl and Geraldine. A more thorough investigation would have likely been able to expose Christie much earlier and saved multiple lives. Here's the thing. If the dog was able to dig up the skull, probably means the bodies weren't buried too far below the surface, right? And the fact that a femur was just sitting out and no constable went, well, that's weird. Ignored it. They walked right past it. Walked right past it. And they were just so convinced that they had found their man that they just completely ignored all these other things going on right in front of their eyes. Come to find out, police bias also played a huge role. Remember when I told you earlier that Christie was a wartime constable? Well, when those investigating police found that out, they just immediately assumed he was one of them. He could do no wrong. And they did not think to heed the warnings of Timothy Evans, just believing that there's no way one of our own could do something like this. And even after figuring out that Christie had a string of violent crimes under his belt that he was sent to prison for, they still found Evans guilty of the murder of his wife and daughter. However, there is a happy, unhappy ending to that case. Years later, Evans did receive his posthumous pardon, and his remains were moved to a private family grave. So, thankfully, after Christie was obviously caught after a few more murders, they realized that, oh, it was Christie the whole time. We hung the wrong guy. So his remains were given back to his family, thankfully. I'm sure up to this point we have forgotten that Christie was actually married. He shared a home with his wife, and he would commit these murders while she was away visiting family. Well, one morning, on the morning of December 14th, 1952, Christie turned on his wife and strangled her in bed. And it is thought that it is due to possible financial strain because just a few days before this, he resigned from his job. He ended up selling all of his wife's belongings, forging her signature, and draining her bank account. Now, before the murder, she hadn't been seen out in town for 2 whole days. So after he killed her, he went on to fabricate stories To the neighbors, he would tell them that she was visiting family, and to her family, he would write letters back to them saying that she had developed arthritis and could no longer write, and that was the explanation as to why he was writing back in her stead. Quite a big piece of shit, I would say this guy is. You know what I'm saying? I mean, come on. Dude, not only are you killing people, but you decide, hey, I'm going to quit my job and then kill my wife and sell all of her stuff. That's muffed up. But hey, you know what? He's not a good guy. He's not a good guy. You know, you can't really put anything past these people. It's fucked up. Christie went on to murder 3 more women after killing his wife, the names of these victims being Kathleen Maloney, Rita Nelson, and Hectorina McLennan. By this point, he had modified his gassing technique that he had used earlier on the woman that he worked with in the radio factory, where he said, hey, I got a cure for your bronchitis. Yeah, he went on to use that technique even further. He would invite the women into his kitchen, where he had a pipe connected to the gas supply, sealed with a bulldog clip. Once they were seated and comfortable, he would remove the clip and would allow coal gas to fill the room, causing them to grow drowsy. Christie would then come up behind them with a length of rope and strangle them and rape them until they passed away. I don't like this guy. This dude's gross. This is gross. This is gross. Like, researching it, one thing. Reading this back to y'all, I'm just like even more disgusting. He would then go on and hide their bodies in a little alcove, which is like a cutout in the wall in the kitchen, and then sealed up the entrance to that alcove with some wallpaper. Thankfully, obviously, this dude was caught after those last 3 murders. He, I guess, got into so much financial strain with, not working, that he decided to fraudulently rent out his flat to another couple. And when the real landlord showed up and discovered this other couple, who he was like, what are you doing? I'm renting this place out to Christie. Get out. He kicks out that couple and then allows another tenant who is on the top floor above Christie to use Christie's kitchen. The name of that man was Bresford Brown. While Bresford Brown was using the kitchen and he decided to hang up a wireless radio in the kitchen, Brown noticed the wall was hollow. He removed the wallpaper and uncovered the bodies of Maloney, Nelson, and McLennan. After confirming with a neighbor that they were real bodies, he called the police, triggering a manhunt for Christie. I don't blame Mr. Bresford Brown for calling over a neighbor, by the way, because I think I'd be in just as much shock and be like, is this real? Am I seeing what I'm seeing? I need another pair of eyes before I call the cops over here, because this is nuts. You know what I'm saying? My only other question is, this is a shared space. How do you not smell it, right? I'm assuming in that area of London, it had to be pretty stinky for them to not smell decomposing bodies in this flat. Like, I don't know. Gotta be gross around that area to not be able to smell bodies or even question it, and then you just find it by accident hanging up a radio. Absolutely nuts. While the manhunt for Christie was going on, Christie was out in town. He was wandering the streets, jumping cheap hotels, visiting movie theaters, and selling off his last possessions in order to make some money and scrape by. And on March 31st, an officer near Putney Bridge stopped him and arrested him after confirming his identity. And he stopped him because he was like, hey man, you look like someone we're looking for. So whenever they found out that, hey, that is in fact John Christie, they put him in cuffs. And when they searched him on the scene, they found out that Christie was actually carrying a newspaper clipping about Timothy Evans' arrest. He was carrying around a newspaper clipping about Timothy Evans, the guy that he somehow convinced everybody and got him convicted of the murders that he committed. Yeah, he's carrying that around like a trophy for 3 years, right? Absolutely wild. I just realized the year wasn't listed here. He was arrested on March 31st, 1953. At first, Christie only admitted to murdering the 3 women found in the alcove and his wife. However, when confronted with the bodies in the garden, he quickly confessed to those murders as well. He then went on to admit to killing Beryl Evans, but denied murdering Geraldine. hoping to present himself as insane due to memory loss. And although he was never officially convicted of Geraldine's murder, he reportedly told a hospital orderly he may have had something to do with it. So he kind of confessed off the books and wasn't able to be held as, like, you know, legally you're the one who did it. But he did end up kind of confessing, saying, like, maybe I did. I don't know. And he was trying to play off this whole, like, I don't remember anything, and get an insane plea deal going and being carted off to an insane asylum for the rest of his life instead of the death row. But as we're going to find out, Christie was evaluated by Dr. Matheson of HM Prison Brixton, who testified that Christie had a hysterical personality, but was not insane. Thankfully, that doctor was like, "No, dude, you're... Ew. We're not sending you to a loony bin. You're gonna die." The jury rejected Christie's insanity plea deal, and after 90 minutes of deliberation, found him guilty. Thankfully. Homeboy got found guilty. John Christie was then hung by the neck at 9 a.m. on July 15, 1953 at HM Prison, Pentonville, by, ironically, the same executioner who hanged Timothy Evans. And it's also said that right before he was killed, he complained to the executioner saying, "My nose itches." And the executioner replied, "You're not going to have to worry about that for long." Which I think is hilarious. So what have we learned today? We've learned that John Christie was a piece of shit. And we've also learned that, hey, just because someone might have been a part of your little clique, part of your little crew, doesn't mean that they're not capable of extreme violence. And when you have to investigate into something further and it's a possibility that, hey, maybe they did do something, maybe look into it. You might save some lives. If you enjoyed this episode, we have a podcast episode on this channel where me, Brock, and Doc all dove into serial killers that were active under the cover of war. So if you want to check out that episode, we'll have it linked at the end of this episode. But really quick, what I want to do is I don't want your last thing that you know about John Christie is himself and necessarily the up things that he did while wrong. I want to bring attention to the victims. So we're going to roll pictures and names and ages at the time of death of all of these individuals. Again, not to glorify John Christie, but for them to be the last thing that you think of, so that way, you know, you can put a face to the name. You can put a life to the name. You know, they are more than just their death, and they are more than just victims. So, with that said, I love you all. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.